here, I want to take the opportunity to talk about the very, very, very common, I should say, biblical Hebrew verbal form that we refer to as Wayyiqtol. Okay, because we have many examples here, and also talk about some of the characteristics of the Wayyiqtol and the way it behaves. So let's see. Here in these verses, Leviticus 9, 23, 24, we have ample examples of the Wayyiqtol. We read them Vayyavo, Vayyetze, Vayvarechu, Vayyera, Vayyetze, Vatochal, Vayyar, Vayyaronu, Vayyipelu. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 forms of the Wayyiqtol, all in these two verses. Very, very, very common. This is the workhorse of biblical narrative. This is the backbone of biblical narrative. This is the way you create a narrative. This is the past tense storytelling basic form of biblical Hebrew. Okay, and we'll talk about the morphology of it and the use of it, because it's a good opportunity to talk about it with all of these examples, which are very common. And let's start with the morphology. So basically, the form of the Wayyiqtol verbs is that we have the Vav with the A vowel, usually a Patah, and then we have a Dagesh in the following consonant, which is one of the prefix letters. So it's a prefix conjugations. We have a prefix, okay? And then we have the root, essentially 3 root letters, 3 radicals, first, second, and third, and then possibly a suffix as well. That's the basic structure of the Wayyiqtol verbs, when understandably we may have exceptions and changes that are caused by these, but that's the essential structure of the Wayyiqtol verbs, and we can see that structure reflected here in the examples that we have, in the ample examples that we have on screen. So for instance, this here, Vayyavo, we have the Vav, Patah, the prefix letter Yod, and a Dagesh inside the Yod. Okay, the Yod is a prefix letter, tells us that we have what kind of a person, who is the subject, what is the subject of the action of the verb as far as the person, gender, and number.
3 MS.
Right, when we have a Yod at the beginning and nothing at the end, we're talking about the third person, masculine singular. And you can see Vayyavo, Moshe. Now, Hebrew has a compound subject. So in English, we would say, they came. But in biblical Hebrew, when the verb precedes a compound subject, it tends to agree with the first element of that compound subject. So, Vayyavo, Moshe ve'Aharon. Okay, but still Vayyavo. Afterwards, yes, we do have the plural, Vayyetze, Vayvarechu. Okay, both of these already have the U at the end, marking the third person masculine plural. Okay, because they come after the compound subject, also very common in standard biblical Hebrew, in narrative of biblical Hebrew. But nonetheless, we have the Vav Patah and the Yod with the Dagesh here. Here the Dagesh drop in Vayvarechu because of morphological reasons. Sometimes the Yod loses its Dagesh. Okay, it's one of them, those consonants that may lose the Dagesh. Then Vayyera, Vav Patah Dagesh. Now the subject is no longer Moshe ve'Aaron, but rather Kevod Adonai. And keep that Vayyera in mind, because we'll talk about the morphology of Vayyera and how the Wayyiqtol morphology here differs than the regular Yiqtol morphology that we would have if we wouldn't have had the Wayyiqtol, but rather the Yiqtol. So, Vayyavo Moshe v'Aaron el Ohel Moed, Vayyetze v'Yivarechu et ha'am, Vayirach evod Adonai el kol ha'am. The Wayyiqtol is also very, very, very helpful as far as the division, the syntactical division of the verb or of the verse. So here starts a new sentence, okay, and here we have, okay, and here I would say not really, you can divide it into two sentences because of the Wayyiqtol, but you can put them together. Nonetheless, you can see how the Wayyiqtol appears at the beginning of each of these segments. Okay, Vayyavo Moshe v'Aaron el Ohel Moed, and Moses and Aaron came to the tent of meeting. Vayyetze v'Yivarechu et ha'am, and they went out and blessed the people. Vayirach evod Adonai el kol ha'am. So you can see each of these sentences to which this verse is divided starts with the Wayyiqtol verb. Okay, so that's the backbone of the story and the beginning of sentences. Same goes, by the way, for the second half here. Vayyetze esh milifnei Adonai. Again, the verb, the Wayyiqtol verb, Vav, Patah, and Dagesh in the prefix letter. And here the prefix letter is a Tav, because the Tav at the beginning, nothing at the end, is the third person feminine singular. It's also second masculine singular, but in this case, it's the third person feminine singular, referring to the word ish. Okay? Vayyetze esh milifnei Adonai, vatochal al hamizbeach. Again, going back to the same subject. Vatochal al hamizbeach. What did it consume? Et ha'olah. We've talked about the word olah a few weeks ago. Ve'et ha'chalavim. Okay. By the way, Betsy, I didn't get around to write you an email with an answer to what you said, but now that I see the word chalavim, reminds me that you've asked about the inward parts. And the inward parts are considered to be very, very important. Not necessarily because of the spiritual aspect of it, but though it might be suggested so as well, but also because of the chalavim, this kind of a fat that is surrounding the inner organs, which is considered to be the fat that is offered. Okay, so vatochal al hamizbeach et ha'olah ve'et ha'chalavim. Vayar kol ha'am. Again, we have a transitioning from the subject being the fire to something else, because we see the vav patach and now the yod again. So the subject is kol ha'am. Again, a collective subject. Vayaron uvayipalu. After the subject, we are more likely to have that plural. So that's a bit about the Wayyiqtol and how it helps us. Let's kind of review the Wayyiqtol in the Kal Binyan, as far as the strong verbs. Okay, so we have a Wayyiqtol with the Aleph for the first person common singular, Vayyiqtol, second person masculine singular, and as we said, it's also the third person feminine singular. We had it with Vayyetze esh and Vatochal. Okay. Then Wayyiqtoli, second person feminine singular, you feminine singular did so and so, is as far as part of the narrative. You can see the E at the end letting us know it's feminine. And the most common of them all, third person masculine singular, and he did so and so. We had it with Vayyavo, Vayyera, and Vayyar. Okay, that's the most common in the narrative. Second to it would be the plural form, which we had with Vayyetze, Vayyevarechu, We also had Vayyaronu and Vayyipelu, third person masculine plural. First common plural, Wayyiqtol, second masculine plural, Wayyiqtolu. Note the U at the end, which oftentimes marks the masculine plural, as you can see in the third masculine plural and second masculine plural, and also in the third common plural of the katal, katelu, shameru, achelu, barechu, etc. Tav at the beginning, na at the end, both second and third person feminine singular. Okay, so that's the basic morphology, prefixes and suffixes of the Wayyiqtol. Now, going back to the verses, it should be said that while it is very common to think of the Wayyiqtol just as a Yiqtol with a Vav Patah Dagesh at the beginning, there are differences between the Yiqtol with a Vav Patah and a Dagesh and the Wayyiqtol. Why? Because the Wayyiqtol tends to take a shorter form than the Yiqtol, just with a Vav Patah and the Dagesh. Okay? We do have some examples for that here, and I said keep in mind Vayera and Vayar as good examples. Let's start with these. So what is the root of both these verbs? Vayera and Vayar, they actually have the same root. Guys, do you know what's the root of these?
Ra'ah.
Ra'ah. Third person masculine singular form of the verb would be indeed Ra'ah. Okay, so if I'm going to ask what would be the third person masculine singular kal katal, then Ra'ah would be the right answer. He saw. However, the root, which is again very commonly kind of following this, the root is probably Resh Ayin and Yod. Sometimes you'll see Resh Ayin, Yod, and Hey. And because of the correct mentioning of the third person masculine singular form of the kal katal, if you open a lexicon of biblical Hebrew, then the lexicons mark or list the verbs according to the third person masculine singular kal katal. So they would list Ra'ah, even though the root itself might be slightly different, okay? Because the form that you would see in the lexicon as a basic decision for lexicons of biblical Hebrew is third person masculine singular of the kal katal. Again, different languages would list verbs differently, okay? So while the root is Reish Aleph Yod or Reish Aleph Hey, Reish Aleph Yod historically, we don't see that Yod, okay? Or we don't see that Hey, or we don't see anything else. How would be the Yiqtol form equivalent to these Wayyiqtol? How would be Vayera and Vayar in the Yiqtol? And here comes the difference. Instead of, as opposed to, for instance, Vayyetze, for which the Yiqtol would be Yetzeu, okay? For Vayera, the Yiqtol would be Yera. Okay, Yera'eh, but we don't see that. We don't have Va Yera'eh. No, we have Vayera. We're losing the A at the end. Okay, same by the way, or somewhat similar at the bottom with Vayar. What would be the Yiqtol? How would be biblical Hebrew for he will see? Biblical Hebrew would be Yir'eh. Okay? When Abraham and Isaac are walking together towards the binding of Isaac on Mount Moriah, Isaac is asking Abraham, look, we have the wood, Hineh ha'esh ve'etzim, we have the fire and we have the wood. Ve'ayehase le'olah. However, where is the sheep or for a burnt offering? So Abram says to Isaac, Elohim yir'eh lo haseh le'olah beni. God will see for himself the sheep or the lamb for burnt offering, O my son. Elohim yir'eh lo. So you can see the Wayyiqtol is yir'eh. However, the Wayyiqtol is vayar. So you can see how the Wayyiqtol form is shortened. Can you see that, guys? Are you with me, or have I gone too grammatical, guys? Too morphological? Guys, I wanna hear you. I wanna see that you're with me. Very good. Very good. Very good. You're with me.
With you.
Okay, very good, very good, very good. So here we have a kind of a summary of the common changes that emphasize the difference between the Wayyiqtol and the Wayyiqtol in different groups of verbs. Okay, how the spelling changes in the narrative Wayyiqtol form, consecutive form of the narrative, the Wayyiqtol, again, narrative past, narrative preterite. You've got as many names as grammar books, okay, for these forms. I like the Wayyiqtol term because it feels the most neutral to me. You know, it refers to the morphology and not to the use. So this is why I use it the most. So if the first root letter is a yod, we might find a small kind of a difference in vowel pointing, not getting into the reason at the moment, okay? And here, if the ayin vav verbs, we might see the vav with a u, yakum versus vayakum. This would be a kamatz katan. Kamatz katan in some editions, you might see it's a kamatz katan because it would be longer. I know it's the opposite of what you would think, but this is how it is. So vayakum, you can also see, and I'll go back to the verses that we've seen here. For instance, in Vayyavo, okay, while it is not clear-cut division, it's more likely for the Wayyiqtol to have a deficient spelling. So here you can see Vayyavo without the vav. You can see the cholam is a deficient cholam and not a full cholam. We don't see the vowel pointing with the reading mother of the vav, as opposed to the more common Wayyiqtol form, which would sound exactly the same, but would more commonly have the mater lectionis, would have the reading mother between the bet and the aleph, would more commonly be yavo, like this. Okay? Do you see the difference?
No.
Okay, so the difference, as I said, you don't have to hear it, but you have to see it, okay? Because more commonly with a Wayyiqtol form, you would have the deficient spelling, and with a Wayyiqtol form, with a Wayyiqtol you would have the deficient spelling, and with a Wayyiqtol form you would have the fuller spelling with the reading mother. But as I said, this is more of a statistical observation rather than a consistent morphological change that is reflected also by the hearing. I'm talking about a convention of spelling here that might originate from something else, but it's definitely spelling. Yes, Betsy.
What about the word, and maybe it's not even a word, I know it from a song, Vayyavo.
Vayyavo. That's two words.
Vayyavo. Okay, what is that?
He will come. He will arrive.
What is who is he?
Who is the third person masculine singular?
And it's at the front of the verb. Okay.
And that's third person masculine singular of the Wayyiqtol. Vayyavo.
Vayyavo, but it's a who, not a oo.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes, it's kind of, mixing. I don't know which song, but it's probably Vayyavo. If I get like a Christian Hebrew rock, something
yeah,
like
that's who it is. It's Joshua Aaron. Yes.
I could guess because
I know you knew.
no, not because I know the song, because it talks about Vayyavo.
Yes, it does.
Because of the content.
But thank you, because I always thought it was Vayyavo. But then I saw the Vayyavo.
Right.
And I was like, well, is it oo or is it ba?
Okay. So Vayyavo. There are many Israeli songs that have that, but not in the same context. Okay. So Vayyavo, he will come, he will arrive. Very good. Vayyavo, again, we've talked about Vayera. Going back to these changes, differences between the Wayyiqtol and the Wayyiqtol. If the second root letter is a yod or a vav, we've talked about the presence of the reading mother, be that the uval or the eval, yasim, as opposed to vayasim. By the way, the Wayyiqtol form corresponds with the forms that express the volition, the volitive forms, the forms that express modal or modality rather than indicative forms. So, for instance, when in the Aaronite blessing, okay, when we bless that God would grant you peace, Vayyasem lecha shalom, we're using the volitive form, the jussive form, yasem, which would be the equivalent of the narrative Wayyiqtol Vayyasem. Okay, not critical. If an example presents itself down the road today, I will draw your attention to it again. So, Vayiven Uzziyahu Migdalim Yerushalayim, and Uzziah built towers in Jerusalem. So Vayiven, and he built. Yivneh, he will build. Okay. God will build the Galilee. El Yivneh HaGalil. It was a song, early Zionism song. Okay. Or Mi Yivneh Bait Bet Tel Aviv. Who shall build a house in Tel Aviv? Anachnu hachalutzim nivneh Tel Aviv. We, the pioneers, we shall build Tel Aviv. Yeah, a very old song today. You don't need to encourage anyone to build in a city that has prices that are crazy and nobody can afford living there. So that's Yivneh versus Vayiven. And generally speaking, across the Hefil verbs, we have the Wayyiqtol form taking Yarkiv and the Wayyiqtol taking the shortened Yarkev. Generally speaking, you noted the Wayyiqtol, like the jussive, as we said, like the volitive, the jussive form take the shorter, sometimes shortened form of the prefix conjugation. So we've talked about these verses. Again, the context is how the divine presence appears in the inauguration of the tabernacle, and the corresponding verses in the Haftarah is the presence of the Lord with the Aron, with the ark